Hello my friends, we are going through our series on a life that looks like Jesus. The acronym we're using to think about the things that Jesus did and how we actually can live more like him is BELLS, B-E-L-L-S. The first week we looked at our job to bless people around us. The last time I was speaking to you, we looked at how to be more like Jesus, we should eat with more people. And this week, I think this is like the centerpiece of everything, of the way you become more like Jesus, because this week is the first L, and the first L is learn. Our job, my friends, is to learn the way of Jesus, to learn what Jesus was like. And the way you do that is by setting aside time every single week, maybe an hour, like half an hour, to actually read the stories of Jesus and understand what Jesus was like, how he thought and how he acted, so in turn you can live and act and think just like he did in the situation that you find yourself in. I had this really interesting experience with a girl who started going to our church. Her name's Ira, and she's from the Ukraine. And after coming to our church for probably about 6 months, I think she'd been in Australia for maybe 3 years by the time she came to our church, but she'd been coming to our church for about 3 months. And I was having a chat with her about our church and what she liked about our church. And she said, look, I've never been at a church where people talk so much about Jesus. I was like, well, that's interesting, because I thought churches were all about Jesus. I said, what do you mean by that? You've never been at a church that constantly is talking about Jesus. And she said, well, back home in the Ukraine, when she went to church, and she did go to church, she'd been a Christian for a long time, she said the churches, they always spoke about God. It was always about God, what God is like, and what God has done in creating the world, and God's sovereignty and his power and all that kind of stuff. But she said they virtually never spoke about the person of Jesus. They always spoke about God. And then she said when she was here in Australia, she went to a whole bunch of churches and it was very, very similar. They spoke about, God's omnipresence and how he's all powerful and all knowing and all that kind of stuff. But the churches she went to didn't talk that much about Jesus. Isn't that fascinating, my friends? I wonder whether or not we as Christians, we know a lot about faith, we know a lot about church, we know a lot about our practices, but do we actually know that much stuff about the person and work of Jesus? Now, I'm not talking about his greatest hits. You might know like that he was born, in Bethlehem or a manger, and that he died at the hands of the Romans. You might know a couple of miracles. I want to say, do we really know Jesus, like know him, and not just know about him, but understand him and feel connected to him and have a relationship with him? My friends, what I want you to do right now is just to test this for a minute. I want to give you like 5 minutes just for you to write down all the things that you know about Jesus. Like grab a piece of paper, grab some friends. What are all the things that you know about him? I want you to like think about what he ate. I want to think if you know what he dressed like. I want to you to think about if you know what his friends were like and where his friends were from, as well as the miracles he did and the parables he told and the things that he taught. Spend a little bit of time thinking about what you know about Jesus. I think it's so fundamentally important that we get to understand and know Jesus and spend time learning Jesus for a number of reasons, but one of them is this. A guy a while back, his name is Dan Kimball. I want you to picture Dan Kimball. He's like a hillbilly rocker. He's got like, the cool kind of Elvis style hairdo. He's like a bit of a punk kind of guy. He's this cool looking rocker dude. And he wrote a book called They Like Jesus, But Not the Church. And his book came out of this very simple premise. He used to work on universities. He was a chaplain at universities. And he would go around and he would talk to people at the universities about church and about Jesus, and he'd take up surveys about them. Not surveys where he's trying to trick them into following Jesus or anything like that, but literal surveys to find out what they thought. You know what he found out? People loved Jesus. Like pretty much everyone he spoke to, they said he was a fantastic guy. We respect him for the way that he empowered the poor and the downtrodden, for the way he overturned like structures, for the way he like spoke up for the vulnerable. They loved his teaching. They loved what he stood for. They loved that he loved people. They loved Jesus. And they would constantly say how much they loved him. But when he spoke to them about the church, you know what he found out? People hated the church. They thought the church was the exact opposite to Jesus. While Jesus was loving, the church was kind of hate-filled. While Jesus was inclusive, the church was exclusive. While Jesus seemed to care for the poor, the church seemed to care for the rich. They liked Jesus, but not the church. And what was going on there, my friends? I think the church had moved away from what Jesus was like. The church had become not like their founder. I think it's attributed to Gandhi that Gandhi said something like, I like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians. Your Christians don't look very much like your Christ. My friends, here's one of the things that we need to be honest about. Sometimes we as Christians, sometimes the church as the followers of Jesus or the people of Jesus have not done a good job of being like Jesus. And this is an absolute travesty, my friends. We need to rediscover what Jesus was like, understand him, and then that, my friends, will inspire us to be like him. Do you follow me? Here's the next task that I want you to do. I want you to list all the things that you've done this week that you could imagine Jesus doing. Everything that you've done this week that you can imagine Jesus doing. Now, that's an interesting question. And again, I want you to think about it. You can imagine Jesus eating. You can imagine Jesus going to the toilet. If you can imagine him doing it, write it down. And then hopefully there's a couple of things in there as well, like actions or moments or conversations that you had that you can imagine Jesus having. Just have a look. What things have you done this week that you think Jesus may have done as well? Now, what we're wanting is for people to rediscover what Jesus was like, and then that will in turn help us to shape our lives like Jesus. Now, a little while ago, there was this, people used to wear wristbands that had WWJD on them, and that stood for what would Jesus do. I think I had a poster of Britney Spears and she was wearing one. That's how big it was back in the early 2000s, what would Jesus do? But I don't think we need to ask that question. It might be the wrong question for us to ask. I think what we really need to be asking is the question, what would Jesus have us do and say and think in the context that we find ourselves? Jesus didn't live in the 21st century. It's kind of hard to put him here in a way, but we can say, with all the stuff we know about Jesus, what does Jesus want us to do, say, and think in the world that we live? That's our job, is to understand who Jesus was, my friends, so that can inform the way that we live. But we don't want to just build a whole bunch of knowledge about Jesus. What we really want, what Christianity has always been about, is a whole bunch of people who don't just know about Jesus, but who know him and love him and are in awe of him and speak about him like he's a real person that they love and that they know. See, I think we've sometimes fallen into these problems as Christians. There's a whole bunch of Christians who know about Jesus, heaps of information, but they don't even seem to like him or love him, and they're not energized when they speak about him. Well, there's a whole bunch of people who have these really great feelings about Jesus. They feel like they love him or they're connected to him, but they don't know actually anything about him. Are you following me? We have these two poles, people who know heaps but don't love him, people who know nothing but really love him. My friends, we need to bring those two things together. When you think just for a minute, where do you find yourself in that? Do you think you're someone that knows a lot about Jesus but doesn't feel much about him? Or do you think you would be someone who doesn't know that much about him but has great feelings towards him? My daughter and her friends, they love Taylor Swift. They are obsessed with Taylor Swift. She's 8 years old, and all her friends are listening to all their songs. They know all the lyrics about Taylor. And when you speak to them about Taylor Swift, there's this energy, this vibrancy. They feel like they know her, and they don't just know her, they love her. They can answer all the kind of different questions about her, like when she was born, where she grew up, what the songs that she's written. They can answer all these questions, but when they answer them, they don't answer them dispassionately like a whole list of information. They answer those questions passionately because they are invested in her as a person, my friends. That's what we want. For the followers of Jesus, for us, is to to know about Jesus, but when people ask us about him, we want to speak about him, like, not dispassionately, but like he's someone that we know, someone that we love, someone who's impacted us in some kind of way. We want to speak about him with awe and wonder, with a whole bunch of information about him. I think the only way you develop that, if you think about how you develop a relationship with someone, is just by like getting to know them and understanding them. It's the only real way to do it. And my hunch is, whether you're a Christian here or not, is if each week you said, I'm going to read a whole bunch of stories about Jesus, I'm just going to keep doing it every day, each week, I'm going to read stories about Jesus, you not only would know a whole bunch more about him, I think you'd begin to develop this awe and wonder and genuine love for him as well, because the stories about him, my friends, are so darn amazing, mind-blowing, actually. The last task I have for you now is just to read one of those stories. I've got to check the reference, but I want you to look at Mark chapter 5. What's the reference? Verse 21 to 43. It's a story of an encounter that Jesus has with two different people who are in need. I want you to read it a couple of times, and then answer the following questions, which hopefully will come up on your screen. How do you think Jesus felt during this interaction? What was he thinking? And why did he do the things that he did? Next question is, what was surprising about this interaction that Jesus had, do you think? And how does this make you feel about Jesus? This story make you feel about Jesus? The questions will come up on the screen, and that's your job, my friends. Okay, peace